So we tend to operate on the assumption that bad people are lower than or lesser than good people. And we tend to also operate on the assumption, it's a different assumption, but the people who make the first tend to make the second one. We also operate on the assumption that unless people really screw up, they are to be regarded as good or as having some kind of moral merit. Most people are completely beneath good and evil. And so I was thinking earlier, okay, well, consider somebody really, really, really deeply, unambiguously, unalloyedly evil like Stalin or Mao. So then I was thinking, well, what about my bureaucrat sort of pseudo professors when I was in grad school? Were these supposed professors, for lack of a better word, were they better than Mao or Stalin? Were they worse than him? Well, both questions seem misconceived. These bureaucrats were not, it would be obviously misleading to say that they were worse, but it would also be very, very, very misleading to say that they were better or that they were equal. The truth is that Mao was sufficiently in the game. Mao, as paradoxical as it may sound, Mao actually had enough moral weight. He was moral enough to be immoral, a certain degree of morality, or at least of moral bearing. I realize it's a vague expression, but I'm formulating an idea here, so I would ask for a bit of patience on your part. But a certain amount of morality, of moral depth, is required to be deeply immoral. And of most people, it cannot really be said that they are bad or immoral. It can sometimes be said that they're scumbags or that they're passively weak or lame or scummy or whatever, but they simply don't have the character. They don't have the characterological wherewithal to be villains in the sense in which Stalin and Mao were villains. Of most people, it can only be said that they are far beneath good and evil. And I think that in most cases, when people finally do get around to punishing deeply evil people like Stalin and Mao, when that happens, of course, in order for things to get to the point where they actually have to be punished, those people first have to have been adulated and followed by lots of people, showing how much hypocrisy is involved in their eventual punishment. But when people do finally get around to punishing people who actually are bad, a lot of the vitriol that is there is not related to the fact that they're bad, it's related to the fact that they actually have free will. So most people are actually envious of the criminal or of the bad person, the genuinely bad person, not just the kind of passively scummy bureaucrat, but most people are actually envious of anyone who actually has the ability to do anything freely, even if it's a bad thing. And when somebody does do something freely, and when, moreover, that thing is bad, or at least can be characterized as bad, then people have an excuse to vent all the envy and hatred that they have developed over their lives or unlives as moral paralytics, essentially. They have an excuse on that occasion to vent all of that rancor. And what I've also noticed is that people who are bureaucrats, who really were not exactly robots, but pretty close to being robots, people who were just too weak and fearful and brittle and myopic and generally stunted to even be bad. I've noticed that what such people do is, within the very narrow limits of their authority and of their shriveled and atrophied freedom of the will, they actually will sometimes attempt to be bad, and they'll be really particularly nasty and ill-willed. And what they tell themselves, it is clear, is that they're being really diabolical and clever, that they're really being bad. But what they really want to do is not to be bad, but to actually have free will. The only way that they can actually have free will, or the only way that they can impersonate somebody who is free, is basically by abusing their tiny little bureaucratic bit of authority. And so a lot of times when you're dealing with a particularly ill-willed, petty bureaucrat. What is going on is only secondarily that this person wants to be evil. It is primarily that this person wants to be the free person that he is not. And his power games are not so much about trampling on somebody. They are indeed about that, but they are only secondarily about that. It is rather that, given how brittle he is, how weak he is, the only way that he can have free will, or at least impersonate somebody who has free will, is by misusing his bureaucratic power in such a way as to trample on somebody. So it's primarily about being free, or at least telling himself that he's being free, and only secondarily about ill will and power abuse. The power abuse is a means towards an end, the end being freedom, or at least the appearance thereof.